I told you it was going to be an exciting discussion. So with this, do we have more questions? We still have 15 minutes to 5, so bring it on. Any more questions for the panelists?
Just one, what you're talking about having windows open. We have 2 old buildings that are steam heated. Some have the old radiators in them, and some have new radiators. But there's no regulation, and it'll get so hot in there in the winter. No matter how cold it is outside, the windows come open, so occupants are more comfortable.
Well, yeah, but at that point, I'd put regulators on the radiators. I mean, there are thermostats to let it condense inside in the radiator and then return to condensate. What are you doing with the condensate? Does it go back to physical plant?
Return.
Okay, good. Okay, good. Is it also well insulated?
Not the old portions.
It needs to be. So I mean, these are the things that, of course, that everybody knows. I mean, it's attention to detail, and it.
Then there's the issue of some of these buildings are so old they have other issues like asbestos insulation,
Oh, yeah.
which requires
Yep.
in a crawl space requires a lot of extra money to dispose of.
I'm right there with you. I've worked around free asbestos and insulation. I've worked around encapsulated in transite. I've worked around it in CVT tile. And yeah, I've had remediation projects, and it's a bear, and no doubt about it. Now there are encapsulation strategies if it's not necessarily removal, but it doesn't allow free fiber to flow. So I don't know if you've ever looked at any of that. And I like removal myself because that eliminates the threat.
You can use graduate students.
Yeah, there you go. There you go.
Any more questions?
Along with LED lighting, is there anything like dampering systems whereby when the building is in cold use that would lower them down and either shut them off or?
Are you talking about like a variable airflow system, or yeah? I mean, there's a lot of automated control systems you can do on dampers, on fan speed, a lot of different things. Like for instance, in this room, when the HVAC designer used ASHRAE fundamentals to design this room, basically what they looked at is 100 people in here doing jumping jacks, and so they sized the system to deliver in these registers that amount of air to cool that down to some predetermined temperature. That's called a test, adjust, and balance. It's called, in the slang in industry, it's called a TAB. Okay, and in that TAB, you adjust these dampers so when that fan kicks on, it's delivering that amount of air to this room to make it comfortable for everybody. Okay, and the thermostats on the wall are supposed to kick it off as soon as it gets too hot or too cold. Now, one interesting thing, I'm glad you said this, is a lot of these thermostats have a deadband that's as wide as the Great Plains. So you think they're being accurate, sometimes they're not. And they'll way overshoot and undershoot. Now again, this is cost now. This is, what I'm trying to do is say there are things you can do with no cost or very little cost. Now you start replacing thermostats and looking for absolute minimal deadband in temperature and making sure they're placed where it can see the distribution in this room. That's a little more money. But you can turn systems off. You can control damper positions. Absolutely. Yes, sir.
I didn't quite understand what you did with the landfill. Explain that.
Yep. Landfill in LaGrange was a landfill that was not required to remediate its air emissions. Okay, landfills that are of a certain size can sit there and throw their air emissions to the environment willy-nilly. And yeah, isn't it something? Now let me put this in perspective. The landfill in LaGrange is in total about 220 acres big. If you all know that part of the world, as you're coming down Interstate 85, Interstate 85 comes southwest from Atlanta to Montgomery. Okay, before you get to LaGrange, Interstate 185 goes straight south to Columbus. Okay, that landfill is right in that little triangle. Okay, 200 acres. It's filled 40 acres non-subtitle D, which is an unlined old 40-acre site, capped. They permitted then a subtitle D under new source performance standards for a 50-acre, 5 10-acre cells that were lined. Now, here I come along in about 1999, 2000, and I asked the city, I said, hey guys, are you guys interested in developing the landfill for landfill gas project? And they just looked at me like deer in headlights. And because this landfill did not meet acceptable criteria for landfill gas projects up to that point, okay, everybody thought they had to be these big behemoth landfills. Well, the way landfills work is they biodegrade, they anaerobically decompose the material. The stuff rots in the absence of oxygen. And as a result of that anaerobic activity, instead of throwing CO2, does anybody in here compost? Okay. Well, you have a tumbler, or do you turn your pile? Okay. If you turn your pile, the reason you do that is you're putting air into the system. That's an aerobic system. And instead of generating methane, you're generating CO2. Okay. Landfills you don't turn because they're too big. You don't have anybody in there pitching them and stuff like that. So what happens is the biological activity uses up the oxygen. The aerobic activity depletes the oxygen, and then it snaps anaerobic. When it snaps anaerobic, there are still bugs that live in, there's still microbes that live in an oxygen-free environment, and it just, like a little Pac-Man, and goes and eats the garbage. Well, instead of throwing CO2, it throws methane. Natural gas is 95% methane. Landfill gas is 50% methane. But the way the federal laws are written, in order for a landfill to have to remediate its air emissions, it has to reach what's called a 50 megagram threshold. 50 megagrams of non-methane organic compounds, these are light fractions, generally butane and lighter. These are, off the top of my head, propene, ethylene, propynes. They're these kind of real flaky little, fluffy, easily volatile hydrocarbons that generally flash well below zero. In other words, they have a boiling point well below zero. So in the atmosphere, they just freely just evaporate. And boom, there they go. Okay, so at 50 megagrams, a landfill operator has to put in a flare. Now, if you've ever seen these behemoth landfills that have little flares tickling on them, the reason they're doing that is because they've got to burn off the methane. And the reason methane's so insidious, it is 23 times more insidious to global warming than one carbon dioxide molecule. That's why this is so bad. Now let me even paint even the worst doomsday scenario. It's not if, when the Arctic ice thaws and the methane hydrates come out, the statistic is that that will be 30 to 50 times greater than all anthropomorphic, all human-caused CO2 emissions. This is a scary statistic. And so we have naturally occurring anthropomorphic methane as a result of anaerobic digestion in landfills, in wastewater, in poultry, beef, livestock operations. So if you have these biofuels projects are wonderful. I know the people at the University of Georgia, at the University of